I had only been gone for 10 days. My older sister Beatrice had broken her ankle, and I drove 2 states over to help her manage her house. When I pulled into my own driveway on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, all I wanted was a hot shower and a cup of tea. Instead, I found a heavy, cheap combination lock bolted to the door of my back storage room. I stood in the hallway, my overnight bag slipping from my shoulder, staring at the shiny metal. This room was my sanctuary. It held my late husband's vintage camera collection, his woodworking tools, and my painting supplies. I hadn't locked that door in 30 years. Footsteps padded down the hall. My daughter-in-law Harper rounded the corner holding a mug of my expensive coffee. She didn't even flinch when she saw me looking at the lock. "Oh, you're back early," she muttered, taking a slow sip. "What is this, Harper?" I pointed to the door. She smirked, leaning against the drywall like she paid the mortgage. I needed a home office for my new consulting business. That room was just full of useless junk anyway. So I cleared it out. It's my office now, stay out. I looked her in the eyes, feeling my heartbeat steady into a cold, calm rhythm. Not in my house. She rolled her eyes. Liam said it was fine. "We need the space, Zelda." "Don't be dramatic." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, completely dismissing me. She thought I was just an old widow who would grumble and eventually back down. She thought I would cry to my son and beg for my space back. Harper laughed to herself as she walked away, thinking I was a pushover. She had no idea what I would do next. Liam and Harper had moved in 2 years ago. The story was familiar. Rent was too high. They needed to save for a down payment. It would only be for 6 months. I welcomed my son with open arms. But 6 months turned into 24. The savings account never materialized, but a new luxury SUV and designer handbags certainly did. I kept quiet to keep the peace. I washed their dishes, paid the utilities, and bought the groceries. No more. I didn't follow Harper into the kitchen. I didn't raise my voice or start an argument that would just give her the attention she craved. Instead, I picked up my bag, walked into my bedroom, and unpacked. Then I headed down to the basement. My husband had labeled the electrical panel meticulously back in 1998. I ran my finger down the faded ink until I found the switch labeled back storage/sunroom. I flipped it to the off position. The house went perfectly quiet for about 10 seconds. Then I heard Harper's irritated groan echoing from upstairs. I opened my husband's old toolbox, which I kept tucked under the basement stairs. I found a heavy-duty industrial padlock, the kind you use for shipping containers. I slipped it through the latch of the breaker box, clicked it shut, and dropped the only key into my pocket. Upstairs, Harper was stomping around the hallway. I walked up the basement stairs and found her glaring at the ceiling fixtures. "The power just went out in my office," she snapped, crossing her arms. "Did you do something?" I walked past her toward the kitchen. "Must be a wiring issue." "The house is old." "Well, call an electrician. I have a Zoom meeting in 20 minutes. I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. Let's see how much work she could get done in the dark. When Liam came home from his shift at the warehouse, Harper immediately ambushed him at the front door. I sat in my recliner with a book, listening to her complain about the power outage and my attitude. Liam shuffled into the living room, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked exactly the way he did when he was 12 and broke a neighbor's window. "Mom, Harper says the power is out in the back room. Can we call someone to look at it?" I turned the page of my book. I'm not paying a professional $100s of dollars to look at a room I can't even access, Liam. The door is locked. "She just needs privacy for her business," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "Can't you just let her have this?" "No." I closed my book. "That room contains your father's things. It contains my things. I want the code to that lock right now." Liam looked back at the hallway, terrified of his wife. "Mom, please. Just give it a few days. She's really stressed." He walked away before I could answer. He had chosen his side. I realized then that waiting for my son to stand up for me was a waste of time. I had to take control of my own home. I pulled out my tablet and logged into my internet provider's portal. For 2 years, I had paid for the highest-tier fiber optic internet so they could stream movies and play games. I clicked Downgrade, selecting the cheapest, slowest basic plan available. Then, I changed the Wi-Fi password. If they wanted to play territorial games in my home, I'd show them who actually owned the territory. Saturday morning arrived. Liam and Harper dressed up and left the house for their weekly expensive brunch downtown. They didn't invite me. They barely even said goodbye. The moment their SUV pulled out of the driveway, I walked straight to the back storage room. The cheap combination lock mocked me from the latch. Harper thought she was so clever, locking the door, but she completely forgot how doors actually worked. I went to the garage and grabbed a flathead screwdriver and a hammer. I knelt beside the door frame, placed the screwdriver under the bottom hinge pin, and tapped it upward with the hammer. It popped out effortlessly. I did the same to the top hinge. Within 3 minutes, I pulled the entire door loose from the frame and set it against the wall. I stepped into my room. My breath caught in my throat. My painting easel was shoved into a corner cracked down the middle. My canvases were stacked carelessly on the floor. But worse, the metal shelving unit that held my husband's vintage cameras was completely bare. In their place was a sleek white desk, a fuzzy pink chair, and Harper's expensive monitor. I walked over to her desk. I didn't touch her electronics, but I did notice a piece of paper sticking out from beneath her keyboard. It was a handwritten receipt. Tom's Vintage and Pawn, paid in cash $450 for assorted film cameras. My chest tightened. She hadn't just moved my husband's belongings. She had sold them to fund her little office makeover. Harper had left the evidence sitting right on her new desk, careless and arrogant. I didn't waste a single second standing around in shock. The anger that pulsed through my veins wasn't hot or blinding. It was cold, sharp, and focused. I picked up the handwritten receipt from beneath Harper's keyboard, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my pocket. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was undeniable proof that my boundaries hadn't just been crossed, they had been shattered and sold for spare change. I grabbed my car keys, locked the front door behind me, and drove straight downtown to Tom's Vintage and Pawn. Tom had run the shop for over 20 years. My late husband, Arthur, used to spend hours there arguing about lens apertures and film stocks. When the heavy glass door swung open and the old brass bell jingled overhead, Tom looked up from behind the counter. His weathered face broke into a familiar, warm smile. "Zelda." "It's been a minute," Tom said, adjusting his glasses. "How are you holding up?" I walked straight to the counter, pulled the folded paper from my pocket, and smoothed it flat against the glass. "Tom, I need you to look at this receipt. A young blonde woman came in here a few days ago and sold you some cameras. They belonged to my husband. She stole them out of my house." Tom's smile vanished instantly. Color drained from his cheeks as he looked down at the paper, then up at me. "Oh God, Zelda. I had no idea." She came in with a sob story about clearing out her grandfather's estate to pay for medical bills. She looked so earnest, I didn't even think to ask for an ID matching the name. "She's my daughter-in-law, and she lied to you," I said, my voice remaining completely steady. Those cameras weren't hers to sell. Arthur's Leica and his Rolleiflexes were meant for our grandson one day. Tom swallowed hard, stepping back. He walked quickly to a locked display case in the back of the shop and returned a moment later carrying 2 familiar leather cases. He set them gently on the counter. "They're right here. Unsold, untouched." Tom said, his voice laced with genuine regret. "Take them, Zelda. I'll eat the $450 out of my own register." I'm just deeply sorry I didn't vet her better. Thank you, Tom, I said carefully, checking the contents of the cases. Everything was there. I packed them safely into the passenger seat of my car, started the engine, and drove home with a heart full of resolve. Harper thought she could quietly liquidate my life behind my back. She was entirely wrong. I pulled back into the driveway 2 hours before Liam and Harper were scheduled to return from their weekly excursion. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I walked down the hall, unlocked the back storage room, and pushed the door open. The air still smelled faintly of Harper's synthetic vanilla perfume, a scent that always gave me a headache. I walked over and threw the windows wide open, letting the crisp afternoon breeze sweep out the staleness. Then I went to work. I didn't pack her things away like a delicate librarian. I unplugged her expensive monitor, wrapped the cords around the base, and piled her decorative desk plants on top. I picked up her fuzzy pink office chair and carried it through the kitchen, setting it out on the back patio table. Next came the heavy white desk she had ordered online, using money Liam should have been putting toward his savings. It was bulky, but years of gardening and maintaining a home had given me plenty of functional strength. I dragged it across the hardwood floor and shoved it out the back door, leaving it beside her chair in the open air. With the room cleared of her superficial clutter, I brought my husband's vintage cameras back inside, placing them securely on the heavy metal shelving units where they belonged. I set up my painting easel in the center of the room, positioning a blank canvas just the way I liked it. I stood in the doorway, looking around. The room finally felt like mine again. I reached into my toolbox, removed Harper's cheap combination lock from the latch, and tossed it into the recycling bin. In its place, I installed a heavy-duty commercial-grade brass deadbolt that I had bought at the hardware store earlier that week. I turned the key twice, listening to the solid metallic click echo down the hall. I slipped the only key onto my personal keychain, put the kettle on the stove, and poured myself a cup of hot tea. I sat down in my recliner by the front window, took a slow sip, and waited for the front door to open. At 2 p.m., the SUV pulled into the driveway. Liam and Harper walked through the front door, laughing about something. Harper stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the hallway. She realized the storage room door was closed. She marched over, grabbed the handle, and yanked. It didn't budge. She saw the new brass deadbolt and spun around to face me in the living room. "What did you do?" she shrieked. "Where is my stuff?" "Your belongings are on the back patio," I answered calmly, not getting up from my chair. Liam rushed into the room, his face pale. "Mom, what is going on? Why is her desk outside?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out the receipt from Tom's pawn shop, and dropped it on the coffee table. "Your wife sold your father's cameras for $450, I told him. My voice was dangerously quiet. She stole from this house. Liam stared at the receipt, then slowly turned to Harper. "You sold Dad's cameras. You told me you just boxed them up and put them in the garage." Harper's face flushed bright red, but she didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed that she had been caught. "They were just gathering dust." "Liam, we needed the money for the office supplies. That was my office." Harper screamed, pointing at the locked door. I smiled faintly and pointed toward the backyard. "Not anymore." "You can't do this," Harper yelled, stomping her foot like a toddler. "We live here too. You reside here." I corrected her, standing up. "You don't contribute. You don't pay rent. You don't buy groceries. You just take." I looked at Liam. He was staring at the floor, absolutely paralyzed. "I'm done," I told him. "The free ride is over. You pay for your own lives starting today." I walked into the kitchen and opened the large pantry. Over the last 2 years, I had kept it stocked with their favorite snacks, expensive coffee, and organic produce. I pulled out a chain and a padlock I had bought alongside the deadbolt. I wrapped it around the pantry handles and locked it tight. "Mom, come on," Liam pleaded, stepping forward. "How are we supposed to eat?" "With the money you saved by not paying me rent," I replied. Harper pulled out her phone. "I'm ordering takeout, and I'm going to use the Wi-Fi to find a locksmith to get my room back. Good luck," I said. Harper tapped her screen furiously, then stopped. She refreshed the page. "Why is the internet so slow? I have no signal." I downgraded the plan. I stated simply, "If you want high-speed internet, you can call the provider and set up an account in your own name, assuming your credit is good enough." For 2 years, my home had been their free hotel. That grand opening was officially over. The next 3 days were a nightmare for them and absolute bliss for me. Harper tried to work from the living room couch, but the basic internet couldn't handle her video calls. She screamed in frustration every time her screen froze. Liam tried to cook dinner, but realized all my pots, pans, and ingredients were locked in the pantry or moved to my bedroom. They survived on microwave noodles and tap water. By Wednesday, the reality of their situation had fully set in. Harper tried to use her credit card to book a hotel room, but it declined. She had maxed it out on clothes and the brunch trips. Liam came down the stairs that evening carrying 2 large suitcases. He looked exhausted, older than his 28 years. Harper followed behind him carrying a garbage bag full of shoes, her face twisted in a permanent scowl. "We're leaving," Liam said quietly. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Where will you go?" I asked, sipping my tea. "A friend's couch," he mumbled. "Until we find an apartment." Harper glared at me, expecting me to cave. She waited for me to apologize, to beg my only son to stay, to offer them my home and my money just to keep them close. Instead, I reached into the drawer of the end table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I handed it to my son. Liam looked down at the paper. It was a detailed ledger. I had spent Sunday morning calculating 2 years of average rent, utilities, groceries, and internet bills. The total was staggering. "Consider the debt forgiven," I told him. "A farewell gift. But don't ever ask me for another dime." Harper snatched the paper, saw the number, and went completely pale. She dropped it on the floor and stormed out the front door without a word. Liam picked it up, folded it slowly, and put it in his pocket. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I know you are Liam. Goodbye." I watched from the window as they packed their SUV and drove away. As soon as the taillights disappeared down the street, I locked the front door. I walked back to my storage room, unlocked my new deadbolt, and stepped inside. The room smelled like old wood and oil paint again. It smelled like my life. 10 months later, Liam visited me on a Sunday afternoon. He came alone. He and Harper had separated. The stress of actually having to pay their own bills had broken the illusion of their marriage. We sat on the back patio and drank coffee. I loved my son, and I forgave him, but I didn't offer him a room. When he left that evening, I locked my door, turned off the lights, and went to bed in a house that was finally entirely mine. You know, looking back on everything, the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about door hinges or deadbolts. It was about love, and how easy it is to confuse love with endless sacrifice. For so long, I thought that if I just gave a little more, stayed a little quieter, and absorbed their stress, eventually they would respect me. But I realized that you can't buy respect with passive kindness. You don't have to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm, even if that someone is family. Setting a firm boundary doesn't make you a bad mother or a selfish person. It simply means you finally value your own peace enough to protect it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your adult children is to let them feel the weight of their own choices. If you've ever had to make a tough choice to protect your own peace, or if you just relate to the struggle of setting boundaries with the people you love, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. We all need a little reminder sometimes that our peace of mind is worth fighting for. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next one.